I now give the floor to His Excellency Mohamed Siad Doualeh, Chair of Delegation of Djibouti.
Madame la Présidente.
President, at the outset, I would like to extend our heartfelt congratulations to Her Excellency Ms. Anna Baerbock, President of the General Assembly, at this historic session, which coincides with the 80th anniversary of the establishment of the United Nations. The theme you've chosen for this session, Better Together, 80 years and more for peace, development, and human rights, edifyingly conveys the international community's patient, meticulous, painstaking quest, which it has been undertaking since the UN Charter was signed 80 years ago. We can take pride in what we've achieved and all of the successes of our organization. Despite the difficult context, nothing should dent our determination to build a world that's less unequal, that exhibits greater solidarity, a world that is more peaceful and more prosperous. We extend our gratitude to your predecessor, Mr. Philemon Yang. We're grateful for his openness, his leadership, and his ongoing efforts throughout the session that's just drawn to a close. President, Secretary General, over the last 8 decades, the role of the United Nations was pivotal in support to decolonization in Africa and Asia, as well as on conflict resolution, nuclear proliferation, the fight against poverty and climate change, the promotion of human rights, and the management of pandemic risks. The United Nations, well aware of the need to sharpen its tools, has continuously undertaken the necessary reforms so as to do an ever better job in fulfilling its mandate and responding to the challenges of our time. Under the leadership of the current Secretary General, at the request of member states, given the slow implementation of the SDGs, and with a view to building a multilateralism that's more inclusive, more effective, and interconnected, we adopted the recommendations set forth in the flagship report entitled Our Common Agenda. Faced with the unpredictability of the future and the exacerbation of certain trends which could sap international cooperation, as well as the emergence of new challenges, we, as contracting parties, adopted a Pact for the Future which contains a global digital compact and a declaration on future generations. We stand convinced that we need to build a better world in which we would live better together. We agreed on an ambitious program covering important issues such as peace and security, sustainable development, climate change, digital cooperation, in particular ensuring that we make artificial intelligence a technology that benefits all, in addition to human rights, gender equality, young people, future generations, and the transformation of global governance. Nonetheless, the aforementioned accomplishments cannot conceal the devastating consequences engendered by geopolitical and geoeconomic fragmentation we're currently seeing. Conflicts are proliferating. They're dragging on in Ukraine, in Sudan, as well as in the Sahel. The unspeakable horror of what's going on in Gaza, where children are assassinated with impunity on a daily basis, where famine is being wielded as a weapon of war, while the international community is unable to effectively stop the genocide that's underway, as confirmed by the analysis report drafted by the United Nations and published on the 16th of September under the leadership of Judge Navi Pillay. The norms governing the use of force are being violated with chilling regularity, as illustrated by the bombing, the raids, and the extraterritorial assassinations committed by Israel. We condemn the terrorist attack against Qatar and the violation of its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Speaking on behalf of the Republic, His Excellency Ismail Omar Guelleh, we reiterate our solidarity with the the Emir, His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, as well as the government and the brother people of Qatar. The Security Council is paralyzed by the recourse to the veto, which has become systematic. International law and the norms which have guided us to date are being called into question, a dangerous trend. There's also a crisis of confidence between states, aggravated by the serious liquidity crisis owing to arrears in the payment of assessed contributions. Madam President, Secretary General, the Republic of Djibouti welcomes the recent adoption of the severe commitment, an outcome document at the Financing for Development Conference, the fourth one. This agreement, in our views, is an important step in the quest towards building an international financial system that's more equitable, exhibits greater solidarity, and serves the achievement of the SDGs. The figures are as eloquent as they are alarming. The world is confronted with an annual $1 trillion shortfall when it comes to financing the SDGs. Developing countries are paying more in debt service than they're investing in health or education. In 2023, $1.4 trillion was spent on debt repayment in low and middle income countries. Over 50 countries are today spending over 10% of their government revenues solely to reimburse their debts. In some instances, that figure exceeds 20%. As for ODA, we've seen a concerning drop in overseas development assistance. According to the latest UN reports, only 17% of targets are on track to be achieved in 2030. 37% are stagnating or in regression. None of these 17 SDGs are on its way to being fully implemented. We're seeing hunger on the rise, inequalities worsening, and the repercussions of climate change are hitting harder and harder, hitting those countries who contributed the least to this problem. Djibouti, although it's a very low emitter, is facing the disproportionate consequences of this crisis: prolonged drought, growing scarcity of water, heightened desertification, extreme heat waves, sea level rise, which is directly threatening our coastal areas where most of our population lives. We stand convinced, as recalled recently at the Second African Summit on Climate in Addis Ababa, that the urgency of the situation requires an effective adaptation strategy first and foremost. In Djibouti, the Sovereign Carbon Agency is collecting carbon contributions on the basis of the polluter pays principle, transforming them into adaptation projects for affected communities. The severe commitment gives rise to new hope. It calls for in-depth reform for financial governance that's more inclusive and better response to long-standing aspirations of the countries of the South. The commitments contained therein must be honoured. It shouldn't become just another text stored in multilateralism's archives. It should serve as a basis for a new global contract underpinned by concrete solidarity, responsibility, and shared ambition.
Committed to transforming its strategic, geographic, and infrastructural advantages from primarily a transit leader to a fully integrated industrial partner for East Africa and beyond. In line with its National Development Plan, Djibouti EC, we will pursue inclusive, sustainable industrialization that adds local value, create more employment and benefits its neighboring countries. Djibouti will leverage its free trade zones, ports, and logistics infrastructure to attract light manufacturing, agro-processing, packaging, and assembly industries that serve regional demand. Djibouti is a strong believer in regional integration, where each country develops and leverages its comparative advantage to contribute to shared growth and stability. Djibouti is and will always remain a serious, reliable, committed, and constructive partner to countries in the region and its many friends all around the world. Just 2 days ago, on September the 27th, Djibouti achieved its first UNESCO Biosphere Reserve status with the designation of the Archipel des Sept Frères, Rassian, Korangar, and Godoria Biosphere Reserve. This major historic step, which underlines our country's commitment to environmental stewardship strengthens our resolve to develop Djibouti's potential to become a premier destination for eco-tourism. Madame la Présidente,
President, Secretary General, we welcome the progress made in Somalia so as to implement national priorities, its national development program, and the stabilization plan. Nonetheless, we are still disquieted by the threat that the terrorist Al-Shabaab militia continues to pose. We welcome the contribution of Somalian forces, African Union forces, and other forces working legally to combat Al-Shabaab. We recognize the enormous sacrifices which have been made. We emphasize the crucial importance of guaranteeing that AAU-SOM African forces are endowed with predictable, sufficient resources so that they can fulfill their mandate under the best possible conditions. Djibouti is a large contributor of the African Union in Somalia since the ATMIS mission. Our troops are stationed in key sectors, Belet Wene, Bulahawa, and Jalalakaksi, in the Haran region in the state of Hir Shabaleh. Faced with an uptick in terrorist attacks, Djibouti heeded Somalia's call by signing a new agreement in July 2025 to pave the way for additional deployments of Djiboutian forces to reinforce stabilization efforts in the country. We must provide collectively robust support to the government of Somalia so as to facilitate their efforts. We cannot accept that these terrorist militias continue their deadly campaign against civilians, Somali forces, and international partners. We cannot accept that they are closing humanitarian corridors. President, Secretary General, we are deeply disquieted by the ongoing hostilities in Sudan, where a fratricidal conflict has been raging for over 2 years now. The death toll is heavy. Civilian infrastructure has been destroyed, which is very costly, resulting in the disruption of essential services being provided such as water, health, and electricity. The ongoing deterioration of the security and humanitarian situation is prompting large-scale displacement. Sudan, which has over 30 million people in need of assistance, according to UN figures, is confronted with a disastrous humanitarian situation which demands an immediate, coordinated response on the part of the international community. We call for an immediate cessation of military operations and for a lasting ceasefire, echoing previous regional resolutions which aim to resolve the conflict. Djibouti reaffirms its commitment to the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the national unity as well as the stability of Sudan, in accordance with regional and international commitments. We reiterate our willingness to work in partnership with regional and international actors who wish to find a peaceful way out of the crisis. We call to place the interests of the Sudanese people as well as regional stability at the heart of our efforts at all times. Madam President, when the United Nations Charter was signed, when the United Nations was established, the international community was drawing on the lessons it learned from the League of Nations. It committed to do everything within its power to spare humanity from the scourge of another war. It would appear that the promise of a war-free world was not upheld, given that, regrettably, today we continue to face a number of conflict situations, some of which are particularly horrific. The most devastating conflict, as old as the United Nations itself, is Israel's ongoing aggression and occupation of Palestinian land. The unspeakable horrors occurring there requires pressing action on the part of the international community, going beyond words and condemnation, which has no repercussions. In Gaza and in the West Bank, Israelis are engaged in what would appear an innocent pastime, killing. Meanwhile, the international community is working to revitalize the two-state solution. As for Israel, it is busy burying not only the very idea of two states, but also any future possibility of a viable and sovereign Palestinian state. Israel's most fervent wish is to compromise the two-state solution, to bury peace under the rubble of colonization and militarization. But without a doubt, their mission is bound to fail. The Palestinian people is a resilient, a dauntless people. The international community is equally determined, as demonstrated by the resolution adopted by a large majority of member states, as well as by the very encouraging results of the international conference held on the 22nd of September, co-chaired by Saudi Arabia and France. We'll never say it enough. The two-state solution is the only solution that can satisfy the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people and to usher in lasting peace. Djibouti encourages the efforts underway so that they can produce the outcomes we hope for.
Madam Judge Navi Pillay admonished, the Security Council must not be the graveyard of conscience, and to this, President Gele recently added, neither must the General Assembly nor any of its member states. Madam President, Mr. Secretary General, the dispute concerning the Ras Dumera area and Dumera Island and Mount Dumera on the land/maritime border with Eritrea, as well as the situation of its prisoners of war held incommunicado, remain unresolved. As we did in previous years, we renew our readiness to work with our neighbors in order to find a peaceful and negotiated solution on the basis of international law. The Republic of Djibouti solemnly reaffirms in this anniversary year, when we celebrate the 80th anniversary of the signing of the Charter of the United Nations, and as required by Article 33 of this fundamental document, its proposal to negotiate either through bilateral means, mediation, conciliation, recourse to the International Court of Justice, or arbitration to settle the dispute in a legally binding and definitive manner. Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, Secretary General. 80 years after its establishment, the United Nations continues to serve as a forum and to provide adequate tools which we could further refine, of course, allowing us to live together better and to tackle the complex challenges our world faces, those related to peace and security, development and human rights. We must do our utmost to ensure that the United Nations doesn't remain a symbolic theatre safeguarding its image, but deaf to the demands for reform, including Security Council reform, which requires the granting to Africa of the seat it deserves, thereby righting a historical injustice. The United Nations is more essential than ever. We shouldn't turn it into a sacrificial victim, a victim sacrificed on the altar of our differences and our inability to bind ourselves to each other with strong bonds of trust. We should work together to inject new meaning into multilateralism and to strengthen international cooperation in the interests of all states, small and large alike. I thank you.
I thank the Chair of Delegation of Djibouti.